to adapt to it?
Thanks, Rahul. It's a pertinent question because most people that I speak with associate, AI with the advent of Gen AI, which happened a couple of years back. But in the industry, frankly speaking, the application of machine learning, the application of classic ML techniques is something that has been really there for more than a decade. Because I remember at least starting with this in the beginning of 2010, 2011, that phase. So you have classic ML, and then of course you have, in fact, what Samir did just before was a classic case, right, which we also face in the industry. Fixed workflow using LLMs, and then where do you really bring about agentic AI to be used? What's important really is to use the right hammer for the right nail. And this means even in the industry now, we use amalgamation of classic ML techniques, reinforcement learning techniques, causality AI as well comes into play, besides agentic AI. And of course, what's important now with the advent of autonomous agentic AI is the whole ability that you leave the decision making as well to the agents. This latter stage is where we're still in early field trials, early POCs in various scenarios as well, in terms of how the application really happens, because there are a host of issues that we really have to tackle, including, there was a recent Harvard study around, I think 9 months back, where they left, they had for a specific office, they created agents with clear objectives for those agents to really achieve. By the end of the day's exercise, at least half the agents had started lying to the other agents to be able to really achieve their net goals, which they were really assigned. So how do you prevent that from happening in the realistic scenario? How do you have the right frameworks in place? So these are aspects which we are still getting there. But the classic ML, the classic LLM-based approach, I think this is now getting mainstream, used in production environments in various domains.
Yeah, thank you for that. So that's, I think, so on the software side of things, but also with like the AI coming up, the other obvious part is the hardware. Like, for example, we have prices rising, we have company becoming $5 trillion overnight. Wink. So like in the hardware domain, how is industry reacting in the hardware domain? How do you scale up for multiple, like millions of users? And I'm pretty sure it's going to even increase in more in amount as more data centers come up. So I would like to know opinions on that.
So thanks, Rahul. I think this is a very interesting question, right? You mentioned one company became a $5 trillion company overnight. So that itself answers that generative AI is an very expensive affair, right? It's not like any other workloads, right? Typical software applications or classical AI, it's not like it requires huge amounts of investment. And what hardware companies like Intel, Nvidia, and others are doing is they're also bringing in innovations to reduce the overall cost. I'll give you an example, right? So these early 70s, we have these CPUs that were invented. They were able to do almost all kinds of generic computation, and people were happy with that using CPUs. And towards late 90s, new types of application came in, like animation or software rendering and things like that, graphics rendering. And that's when the advent of GPUs came in. And towards late 2000, when generative AI came in, people started adopting GPUs for generative AI, right? They were able to perform those matrix multiplication more efficiently than CPUs, and they were started being used. But then there is a huge amount of cost that is involved. So what companies, like one example I could give is companies like Intel did was, they started bringing in accelerators within the CPUs. Let's say most of you have now brought, whoever has brought laptops in the past 6 months, would have seen that the laptop usually carries the name Intel Core Ultra, right? So the word Ultra carries a specific meaning. That means it not only has a CPU in it, it also has an accelerator called NPU, Neural Processing Unit. So that's a separate dedicated hardware that is lying within the your CPU silicon chip that can perform this matrix multiplication more efficiently than a CPU. The advantage is you can run models, say the 13 billion parameter model, like I have personally tested. You can run a 13 billion parameter model right on your laptop. And this is a very important feature for enterprises, right? So if I step back, let's say for an enterprise, let's say we are developing a banking KYC application, or let's say we are managing a telecom network application. For an enterprise KYC application, I don't need data from 3500 BC. If you go to ChatGPT and ask what is the oldest data it has data from 3500 BC all the way till 2022 when it was trained, all the publicly available data. So you don't need such kind of huge amount of data for your enterprise application. Enterprise application, all they need is a generic model which has some general intelligence, but very specific intelligence for that particular domain. Let's say you are working on a telecom, so it needs to know about telecoms rules and regulations, telecom related like RAN, or how does a 5G network works, what are the things that happens in a 5G network. So it needs to know that. So how do you do that? You can take up a small model, 7 billion parameter model, fine tune it with the enterprise specific data. Fine tuning is a process where you actually inject your own data into an existing model. And with that, now you can run it right on your laptop. If not on your laptop, you can actually run it on a CPU itself. Like let's say you have a Xeon based CPU. Now Xeon based CPUs not only has a traditional CPU core, it also has accelerators. Accelerators like an AMX. AMX is an accelerator for advanced matrix extension. As the name suggests, it is very good in doing matrix multiplication. And people who are working with LLMs or generative AI, they know that LLMs is all about matrix multiplication. Majority of the computation happens at matrix multiplication. And this AMX accelerators can do this matrix multiplication much more efficiently. So that way, hardware is growing on. There are a lot of accelerators. I'll recommend, please, if you are using any of your laptops or servers, do understand what are the specifications of those underlying hardware and try to utilize those hardware features so that you can benefit out of it and reduce the overall cost.
Yeah, thank you. That was pretty insightful. So the other aspect when I think about, before we come to some of the more generic questions which folks are interested in, is on the research side of things. So Dr. Sukhdeep, you have been on the forefront of
Now coming to the field 6G or 5G whatever. So I would say 5G has not picked up that well. The operators are bleeding because I would be like little conservative here. Like it was more political driven decision to deploy 5Gs and throughout in all the countries, right? That race was there and it was deployed. Now all in all the circles, everywhere you see 2G, 4G, 5G working parallelly. Okay, but the thing is, everything working in simultaneously. 4G can do everything what 5G can do everything. So let's say 4G can do everything which 5G can do, right? So you need either one of them. So now when I see like people talking about 6G, they talk about quantum, they talk about terahertz, they talk about a lot of things, right? Do we really need it? I really doubt it. It's my conservative thought. We have to first, look back why 5G is bleeding, okay? Because the optimization, the operations and the management, okay? It was not it is not optimized, right? So I like what I see is 6G should be AI driven, where my management, my orchestration, and my operations are taken care by AI. And the best example is like moving away from this monolithic, or I would even say RIC-based architecture to autonomous agentic architectures, wherein in a single circle, my data will tell, okay, in this 4G is required, or 5G is required, or 6G is required, or 2G can suffice me, right? I spawn my nodes, I spawn my network accordingly, and then let it work, right? I don't need all the networks running parallelly. So I think AI should be, like 6G should be driven in that direction rather than talking about speeds and all those things. It's already, we already have it. That's my take.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I would like to ask the entire panel a more generic question about, I think so, which something which Madan brought up is like, how do you look at like with the AI evolution and the job market being affected in your respective domains? Is it like, at least me personally, from for someone being from Google, I do see that the legacy software developers going away and you moving to more prompt-based engineering and stuff, but senior roles are still unaffected, right? That's mostly the current scenario. So, what are all of your opinions on how it's shaping up the job scenario? Yeah.
Okay, so first and foremost, I have a bias. I'm an optimistic guy. Okay, so with that disclaimer, when we look at it from an industry point of view, AI is leveraged from two angles. One, we say AI for productivity of each engineer. So, Pete really mentioned, human into X. We have a clear goal, productivity. This means each engineer should be 10x an engineer in due course of time, with the use of AI tools that we really are able to leverage across the entire life cycle. So AI for productivity of engineers is something that is a clear focus for us. Number two is, how do we leverage AI in the products that we really develop, that we really deliver outside? Nokia being a telecommunications company, and Sudeep again gave a good foundation, right? From the compute layer, how do we enhance and then leverage that capability which comes from the compute players to all the layers above, the cloud layer, the network functions, the management layer on the top, and the exposure of the networks. So this is where we are bringing in a lot of AI capability. And like it was said, while 6G becomes a so-called AI native network, it will be a gradual evolution about how we leverage AI in those. And I can speak about, if time permits, I can speak about individual capability in each of the layers over there.
Definitely. You would like to add something?
To add some perspective to that, let's say in early 90s, right, when computers was being introduced into India, there were a lot of trade unions protesting that it will remove the jobs from the industry, right? And a lot of trade union strikes used to happen and things like that. And with that, the one classical example, banks were one of the key critical sector that was protesting introduction of computers into banks. Now in 2025, if you look back, in 1990, probably the entire Bangalore had hardly maybe like say 50 or 100 banks, total all put together. But now in this area itself, in this IIC campus within this 2-kilometer radius, probably might have at least some 10 or 20 banks and maybe some 100 ATMs. And the number of jobs that computer created, earlier maybe, let's say if there was like 1x in 1990, in Bangalore itself there will be at least some 50 or 100x of employees are employed in banks in 2025. So the introduction of computers has actually increased the number of jobs in the industry, right? But then you will ask, does that mean there is no job loss? Definitely there were some job loss. People who didn't adapt to that new technology lost the jobs. Same thing is going to happen with this generative AI. With the advent of generative AI, one key difference, one key impact that is happening is, let's say I have 20 years of experience, you might be a fresher, or you might be a 5 years experienced guy. So there's a skill gap between you and me. That skill gap is totally bridged by this generative AI now. With that, now how do I differentiate? If I being a 20 years experienced guy taking a 10x salary than a fresher, I need to justify that investment for the company. So how do I do that? I need to step ahead and try to learn some of the key things that probably a fresher or probably generative AI will not be able to solve. Maybe like look into deeper aspects of how do I optimize things and things like that. So people who can learn generative AI, learn how to use it, how to adapt to that, definitely they'll be relevant into the industry. People who think, okay, I have done the 4 years of engineering, I know C++ very well, I can write the data structures and algorithms, probably they can be slowly be outdated, right? So that, keep this in mind, generative AI is going to bring down the cost of software. Softwares are very expensive, right? Even today, even after like 25 years of introduction of computers, not all the banks have sophisticated banking software. Maybe all these nationalized banks like the ICICI Bank and all have sophisticated softwares. But if you go to a local cooperative bank like the Malleshwaram Cooperative Bank, they still might be using Excel sheet or something like that because they are not able to afford the complex banking software. So with the advent of Gen AI, the production cost for the software will come down, that even a cooperative bank will be able to use this software, and then that will eventually lead to more number of jobs. But then the jobs will be people who are going to adapt to these things, to people who know in depth of Gen AI, who can use these things, and that will be the key factor. So please keep learning, keep your motivation high. Just don't go by your syllabus or things like that. That era is gone. That skill gap is no longer relevant. As long as you know the keywords and you can prompt it, you'll get the answer.
I just wanted to add, so 30 years back when I joined Nokia, at that time, so Bell Labs is also part of Nokia now. The way in which inventions were really facilitated in Bell Labs was we used to really seat a chemical engineer, an electrical engineer, an electronics engineer, a computer science engineer together and facilitate. So they would be working on their own individual projects, but we will never have 4 computer science students sitting, together. And that really led to all the inventions that you see, which have come out from Bell Labs, right? Unix, C++, to solar cells, to earbuds that you really put into your ear. Everything comes from Bell Labs. So now, in our office, the way in which we are seated, so I sit along with a near fresher on the other side. We have a mentor-mentee relationship, bi-directional. So I get reverse mentored, and the other way around as well, I mentor him. And we both, besides a normal job, we really pick up a specific challenge that we want to really leverage new technology items. And the reason I snatch the mic away from you is because it's no longer now, any problem you take, it's no longer going to be just solved with computer science skills. You need to have a combination of domain skills, computer science application skills. You need to have business knowledge, right? Because those parameters that you saw in Sameer's Excel, right, in terms of which approach that you need to take. I'm an MBA student as well. I can really put in all the financial business metrics as well, besides the technical metrics, because at the end of the day, whatever you develop needs to stand the test of time, right? It cannot be that you develop an architecture and after 2 years you come back and you have to put band-aids on that architecture. An architecture, a good one, needs to really sustain itself, minimum 7 to 10 years for you to be able to really milk the actual value from that software that you roll out globally. So keep that in mind. That is extremely important for each one of you as you really come into the corporate world.
Okay, so all my reportees are, I would say Gen Zs and straight out of from college or young professionals like 2 to 3 years, So I have, we come across all these situations every day, okay. I would point out Professor Yossi's things. He told how to navigate in this area. One is curiosity, okay, and my another thing is imagination, okay. So I'll give you an example. So we were in the open source one of the meeting where US operators were there, okay, and there were some cloud native solutions which we were presenting to the operator, okay. The operator just had 3 questions like, if your model fails or data drifts or model drifts, right? So who's gonna take the responsibility? Second, network has a scheduler, right? Now think of US or India or China where the data is huge. There will be multiple training requests. Is there any training scheduler? Third, for example, in India we have 10 lakh base station sites, right? So can I deploy AI resources for all? No, right? Not for certain thousands or thousands. So you have to juggle around the resources. Okay. Now these 3 problems which operators gave us, doesn't require any, I don't know, coding or some skills or something. But these are very, genuine problems, business problems as well as the technical problems. Okay, so and then we sat around, we brainstormed. I would say the solutions which came out from the younger generation is much more, much more, I would say, optimized and much more, curated. Why? Because of curiosity and imagination. The power of curiosity and imagination they have. We actually patents on all these things, and we went back to the operator with these things, and we are working with them, on these solutions. So, in nutshell, I would say like, okay, curiosity and imagination. Now, beyond coding skills, we need this to be alive if you have to beat AI or agentic AI, whatever. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Round of applause. So, at least for me personally, if I were to look at coming from someone as a developer, repetitive tasks, if you're doing just someone who does a lot of repetitive or a single step task, that is what I think is at the maximum amount of risk job-wise as compared to something which is more novel and more complex. Although probably after 2 days, the complex problems also start getting tackled in the future. So yeah, thank you for that. My follow-up question would have been like, given the job market, how would students and other people prepare? But I think that answer is already given. So I'll move on to the next question. So with agentic AI and everything coming up, right? You have bad actors. You need compliance. You need to keep these models under control and stuff. So with respect to law and compliance, we have GDPR guidelines and stuff. Like, what are the security? Do you have any are there proper security guardrails being discussed and by the industry so that things don't go out of control? We don't have like an apocalyptic Tom Cruise thrillers in real life.
One of the key factors that is actually deciding whether an enterprise wants to implement a agentic AI or agentic AI solution is about compliance, right? Implementing the technology solution is kind of an easy part, at least relatively easy. But ensuring the consequence of implementing that is a very tough thing. I'll give you one example. I think in early 2022 or just when ChatGPT was introduced, there was a incident that happened with, I think it was with Samsung, where the engineers started taking up the code, the proprietary Samsung code and some internal meeting notes, and put it into ChatGPT and started asking questions about that. And when you do that, what's happening is there is no switch called do not train. Whenever you put some data into the publicly available ChatGPT and things like that, that data can potentially be used to train the future models. And with that, there's a heavy risk of enterprises losing their confidential information, right? Once that becomes public and it is trained into a new model, and somebody who knows in and out of a model re-engineering, he can actually do a reverse engineering of that and extract that data. So that was a very publicly incident that happened. And with that, many companies are definitely worried about that. So what companies are now trying to do is, whenever they are trying to design a generative AI or agentic AI kind of a system, they have privacy as a design that is right from the beginning. Privacy and things like the secrecy of things, these are not taken as an afterthought, right? So people, instead of worrying about building that entire complex agentic AI flows, you need to ensure how do you ensure that the data is private within your system, and whatever the output, whatever the action is taken, it's all relevant. Right? It shouldn't be that it can be it shouldn't take an action. Let's say it's introduced with an event that is not trained for it, right? Then it shouldn't happen that it takes a bad decision. There was again an incident that happened, I think, with Air Canada. Air Canada introduced a chatbot, and suddenly when people started asking questions in different formats, it started giving refunds and things like that that was not part of its own compliance. And then the customers started putting legal case against Air Canada that why I need this refund because your chatbot told that I'm getting the refund. So if companies don't ensure that compliance and governance rules are not mandated or not implemented, there will be economic consequence, there will be consequence related to the legal issues and other things that come into play. So I think all the companies need to ensure that they are all governing that this agentic AI or the agentic AI workflows have restrictions just like how a human has restrictions, right? Like when I go into a company, I need to swipe in, I need to authenticate, and I don't get access to all the resources that I have. Whenever I need a resource, at that point in time, probably I'll get a permission, I need to have different resources. So with that, all this different kind of approach and logging is also very important. How did the agentic AI come to that decision? It took a decision. How did it come to that decision, right? The entire sequence of chain of thoughts has to be logged so that it can later on it can analyze those logs to understand why did it make this decision, right? And if any corrective action has to be taken, definitely you should be able to take. And probably you can use it as a legal, definitely can use those logs and everything in the legal dispute as well.
I think before Yatin takes this, I think it was not Samsung because you visit